Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we're with a very special guest, one of my favorites, Victor Davis Hanson, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and all-around amazing person, and someone who we always like to listen to his thoughts on what's happening. And we just finished the war here in Israel. I was doing an interview a few days ago, and we had to run to the shelter in the middle of the talk. So I think we won't have to do that now. So, Victor, it's great to speak with you.
Thank you.
So, Victor, maybe we can get your just overall take on what we just experienced here in the U.S., in Iran. How do you look at everything these past 12 days?
Well, I think there's been a great exposure of a 50-year, 47-year mythology, and that was the indomitable reputation of the fearsome Iranian military. We all in the West thought they were lunatic, unhinged, they were capable of anything. We all watched the goose-stepping parades. We remembered the 1983 bombing of our embassy, the killing of 241 Marines, the hostage-taking earlier under Carter, somewhere between 600 and 2,000 Americans killed in Iraq by shape charges. They killed one of our CIA agents, tortured him, Mr. Buckley. I could go on and on. The same thing was true vis-a-vis Israel. They were behind all of their terrorist tentacles, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Assad dynasty. They had invited the Russians in basically during the John Kerry Obama period. So everybody thought that they were impenetrable. And so when Israel last fall destroyed their air defenses and had the exchange with missiles, everybody was shocked in the world that so easily the Israelis got rid of their defenses and then chose not to spend more than 3 or 4 tit for tat projectiles on their own. But they were basically sending the world the message that these people are not as formidable. They have a clock in their main square, death to it, all that stuff. And then the 12-day war, I guess I would sum it up is that when our pilots flew from Missouri in the B-2s, and after some 16 hours, they approached Iranian airspace. They asked the IDF for permission to go in. That summed up the whole thing for me. So that Iran had no air defenses, and the Israelis had appropriated them. And so we asked, and we were there for 35 minutes. And here in the United States, we had the left went kind of paranoid, but it was kind of a strange war where you go in, the American involvement was 35 minutes long. And no Americans were killed. You could argue that maybe there were very few Iranians killed beneath there. They mostly had been evacuated. And then Israel did take some significant casualties, but I've never seen a war where Israel's soldiers, maybe none, or maybe 1 or 2 were killed, actual military uniformed. It's very hard. So I guess what I'm saying is when we look back at all of the damage that Iran did and all of the anxieties they caused and all of the warped diplomacy they were responsible for. So we had 7 prior administrations who said, you can't move the embassy to Jerusalem. The Iranians will go crazy. You can't just say the Golan Heights are not going back to the Assads. That's provocative. You can't have the Abrams Accords. They could blanket Saudi. It was all what they could do and never what we could do. And that whole veneer has been destroyed now. So in that sense, it's the Middle East. The other thing very quickly is here in the United States, the left, some members of the right were saying, well, we don't know whether there's 900 pounds of uranium gone, or can you guarantee that it was 100%? The Iranians say this, and you want to say, well, ask yourself this question: is it more expensive for the Iranians to reconstitute about $500 billion of subterranean architecture, infrastructure, or the United States to come back for 35 minutes and take it out again? So really, we're getting down to just one worry about the whole war, and that is, will Israel how long will Bibi Netanyahu be in power in Israel, and will there be somebody like him that would be willing to do the same thing? And how long is Donald Trump? We know the answer. And will there be somebody who will smash that glass mirage again? Or will we get somebody like Barack Obama and Biden and others that start going back and recreating this myth? But otherwise, Iran is sort of it's kind of ironic. It always bragged about all of its proxies, but in a weird way, it's a proxy of Israel and the United States. It's an orphan child. And there's no Russians don't want anything to do with them. They just said, we're not going to give you more air defenses. We're not going to get involved. We have our own problems. We've got 1 million casualties in Ukraine. And you know what? To the extent you cause trouble in the Gulf, it'll only help us. The oil price will go up. And the Chinese said, well, we don't want the oil price to go. So don't go into the Straits of Hormuz, and we're not going to give you air defenses. You get the impression that that was the most despised government in the world, because even Hezbollah and Hamas, it was funny that when Iran was under attack by Israel, it was like, why don't you people do something and help us? And their attitude was, why didn't you help us? We had to fight Israel all by ourselves. You never coordinated any strategy. So they took Hamas out, and when they were done, they took us out, and then they turned their attention to the Houthis, and then by association, the Assad. But you didn't coordinate anything. You thought you could just use us. So there was no honor among thieves, is what I'm trying to say.
And Victor, can you maybe give us an historical context? I was thinking about it today. I spoke with you pretty much a month after, I think, October 7th. And at the time, we were both saying about the lowest of the low place that Israel was in. We had just been attacked by Hamas. More than 1,200 Israelis were killed, tens of thousands injured, 250 odd hostages. Hamas was the weakest of the proxies, and they managed to do what they did. They controlled parts of southern Israel for like 2 days, depending on how you take that into account. And today, from that low place, we seem to be the region's superpower. Can you just historically look at where we were and where we are in such a short period of time?
Well, both of those were contingent on what Israel wanted to do, even though it it had it was almost, correct me if I'm wrong, 50 years to the day that they attacked on October 7th from the Yom Kippur, October 6th. And that was by intent. And they were almost sending the message that, well, after the 6-day war, you were preeminent, and then you got hubristic, and you thought we couldn't do anything. And they had a point there. And so if the Israeli government had been vigilant and hadn't listened to Westerners who said, you've got to show concessions, you've got to deal, Hamas may be violent, but they are more authentically representative of the real Palestinians, and had just concentrated on deterrence. I had been to Gaza, and I looked at that wall once. I thought, God, this is really pathetic, this wall. They should get something like the Theodecent walls in Constantinople or something. But it's all in Israel's hands. So the only thing that Israel has to worry about is when they have these spectacular successes like 1967 or 2025, there tends to be a euphoria and a little bit of hubristic ideas that were indomitable. And then you get governments in power who feel that the existential threat is over, so then we can worry about a Palestinian state, or we can see if we can work on the UN to like us, or maybe we don't need to increase the defense budget. And they get lax, as every democracy, and we do too. And so that's the only thing that I can see. The only thing I would see at this point, the United States has really improved its stature. And when Trump went to NATO, he reminded me of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, when Brutus says he's like a colossus that stands astride and we're beneath him. I mean, everybody was running up to him and trying to cut deals, and they were praising him. But if he hadn't have done what he did, or if it had ended up like the Carter rescue mission, or let's say 3 of the B-2s had crashed on takeoff, it would have been just the opposite. And same thing with Israel. So it's they are at the pinnacle of their both countries are at the pinnacle of their influence vis-a-vis the Middle East. It can't stay at that level, but I think it can stay somewhat forever if they're vigilant and they don't elect a government that has some crazy ideas as in the past.
Yes, I agree. And can you just also talk if you think that this unbelievable victory, because I think it is a victory. There's a little bit of a debate in Israel whether it's a tactical victory or a strategic victory. Meaning, even the best intelligence says that they'll be able within a few years. Israel says, depending on they'll be able, if they want to resurrect their nuclear program. Or is so that's the people say it's tactical. They could still do it. Do you see it as tactical or strategic, or doesn't even matter?
I see it as a strategic victory if the U.S. and Israel chooses to see it that way. It's in their hands. So the Israelis who say, well, upon further examination, we knocked it out for 5 years, but there were elements that weren't completely destroyed, or we found another mountain that had been partially developed, or there was some 900. All of that is just contingent on what Israel wants to do next time. But if Israel says to the world, this wasn't the end, it was just the end of the beginning of a new paradigm. And from now on, if we find that they are trying to enrich uranium beyond 60%, or if they will not allow the UN to go in, then we're going to do what we have to do. And I think the United States can say the same thing, and they'll be able to do it. And the reaction will be the same because, as I said earlier, the Europeans were I talked to some Europeans, email. Their attitude is just predictable. It's, well, we wouldn't have wanted to do it, and we oppose the way it was doing it, but we're happy it was done. And the Russians are, well, it was a useful proxy, but they were always whining about getting stuff. And they were in the Middle East, and actually they were dealing with the Chinese, and we took their drone and re-engineered it. We can make them in Russia. So big deal. And as far as the Sads go, we gave them a house in Russia. And so what? We weren't there for a long time anyway. Big deal. And that was Putin's attitude. And that was sort of what the Chinese are always transactional. And their attitude is, well, you got beat. You kind of embarrassed us. We bet on the wrong horse. And now you're threatening to cut our oil off? I don't think so. And so you look around for all of their allies, and they're such a creepy, obnoxious government that nobody wants anything to do with them. And so I think the West can repeat that if they have, if they get an Obama 2.0 who says we need to get a Iran deal, we have multilateralism, we got to listen, it will be down the same rabbit hole. But I don't. The other thing is, and that's the wild card. So I don't believe the Iranian people are going to rise up en masse like they did in 2009. It's very hard for people, for whatever their agreement with outside liberators, if you're on the receiving end of a bomb, your country, it's very hard to side with the bombers. That said, the Israelis have taken out, I don't know, 20 of their top command and control. There's news reports that the second tier echelon of generals had been getting messages that they might be next. The theocrats are in hiding. We know that the people are starting to do a cost-benefit analysis and saying, well, we didn't get a highway, we didn't get healthcare, we didn't get a new dam project because you gave $500 billion to Hezbollah that's wiped out, and same with Hamas and the Assads. And then you built this $1 trillion over 50 years, all these things, and they're all up in smoke. Why did you do all that? Because, there's one thing about being humiliated, but there's another thing about being humiliated and it was all wasted for nothing. And so I think what that translates into, there will be popular pressure. It won't be overt, but it'll be against the theocracy, and they'll be against the military too for being impotent and incompetent. And a lot of people in the military will say, I don't want to be on an Israeli list. I do not want to take the rap for this. It was the theocracy that did this. And if I get an opportunity and I see any popular support, I'll order somebody not to fire. I mean, it's not that they're going to lead it, but if there was a spontaneous movement to remove the government, I think they would sort of see who is more predominant and join that. So there's some possibility of that in the next few. Donald Trump has to be careful because he does art of the deal transaction. He said, "I love Iran. I love Israel. I don't believe in regime change. I do. And that's, if you think about it, what he's doing, it's really humiliating for Iran to, like that pathetic performance art missile shower into gutter. And then he said, well, they just had to get it out of their system. He treats them as if they're just children. And the more that they try to do it, the more. But he has to be careful that he doesn't rise them up to the level of a normal state, because they're not. And so, but I know what he's doing. He wants to negotiate a deal and a lasting peace and all that. But it doesn't disguise the fact that he's dealing with a renegade lunatic regime that's evil incarnate.
But Victor, about the deal, which was my next question, when I'm just remembering when Zelensky came and Trump said, "You have no cards." So, but here they really have no cards. Their only card was the nuclear program. They were trading that for taking off sanctions, for getting more money. But now that card, at least for the foreseeable future, is they can't play with the card. So, what is the negotiation?
Yeah, there's nothing to negotiate over the regime. And the regime is the only card they have. And I suppose it's something like, well, you saw what happened to Libya. You saw what happened to Syria. You saw what happened, the mess in Iraq. Do you really want that? Because we may be bad, but we could be useful to you. And so I think that's what they're negotiating for the life of themselves. And they don't want, and because they're so hated, the logical assumption is everybody would want them gone. Trump wants them gone. He waffles back and forth, but their argument is, if we go, you'll have multi-ethnic conflict, you'll have a mess. A lot of people would say, fine, it would be better than you. But because we've seen it in Libya, and we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Afghanistan, we've seen it in Iraq, what happens when the autocratic government goes and then you have this mess. I think they're signaling people, that's their only negotiation.
So what they're saying is, don't kick us out because it'll be worse. So just let us live, let us stay in power.
Yes, let us live, and they're lying, of course, but it's let us live, and we'll just keep to ourselves for a while.
And so Trump is, as a negotiator, do you think what would he be willing to give them if they just, like, what are they giving him? What would he give?
Well, he would probably say, if you behave yourself and you don't build missiles and things, we will lift the oil and the embargo. We won't hit your military. You can get rich again, selling oil to the Chinese that buy 90% of it. And we will watch how you spend the money. But if we start seeing that you're going to build, nuclear facilities again, we'll take it out. That's what he'll probably say to them. And they're, it happened during Soleimani. Trump likes to relate that story to everybody, that when he took out Soleimani, they called up and said, we're going to send 30 or so missiles and tell everybody to get inside. And we have to get kind of close so it looks like we were serious. And they did the same thing again. And you get the impression that they are terrified of losing the regime. And they think if they don't reply, the pressure is not coming from the right. The pressure is coming from people who say, the one thing about you guys that we gave you credit for, everybody was scared of you and you gave us deterrence, and now you're weak and you don't even have that. So we put up with your terror, but you're not really, you only terrorize us. You're afraid of everybody else. That's what they're most scared of. And so they'll do anything to retain the idea that they are formidable or they can launch. And, Donald Trump everybody has restraints. Donald Trump does have restraints. It's not the left so much as he's got people within the party and the media on the conservative side that for them, It's always the disgrace of Afghanistan and Iraq. And some of them are very nice people, but if you say you can do this without putting a foot on the ground, or you can do this with the readiness of the military versus 20 years ago has expanded exponentially, they don't want to hear it. It's all, why would you give money to Ukraine or Israel or waste money in Iraq when we have an open border? That kind of stuff. That part of it is the Biden administration did so many things that they feel, and rightly so, that were egregious and need to be addressed immediately. But I tend to think that, though, if you look at our polls of, there's three polls that have been going on. One is of the MAGA, people who self-identify as MAGA. That's about 70% of Republicans. And there's one of Republicans in general, and then there's one of the population. And what's fascinating about it is that the MAGA people are about 65 to 70%. The Republicans are about 80 to 85% supporting Trump for what he did. And the general public is about 60%. And when you look at support for Israel, it breaks down the following, that same percentage. 55% of the Americans, it's gone down a little bit because of all the protests, still want to give to Israel. And that includes the Democrats, independents, and about 65% of MAGA and about 75, 80% of Republicans.
So you're not worried about, because up until when President Trump, at least publicly, was playing, I think we can say was playing it, because he made pretty much, it looks like he made the decision a week or so in advance of the actual bombing, so he knew he was going to do it, and yet he kept on playing like, maybe I won't do, maybe I. And as this was going on, you had the Ted Cruz, Tucker Carlson, um, I guess, show where they were debating each other, and you had newspaper articles all over the U.S. reading from Israel, looking in, that were saying that the MAGA base is fractured about this, that Trump is losing support amongst his best supporters. And what you're saying is that that's not really true. There was a lot of people that were maybe saying things, but they came back home at the end of the day. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, he did that. That was a very wise thing he did when he said he was going to give them one last chance, 1 to 14 days. And he had been told, and he knew that each day that you waited, the window of surprise closed as you get closer to the deadline. So we all knew that he was going to attack within the first 72 hours once you do that. He also wanted to restore credibility because he said, people had said, well, you told us that you were going to end the Ukrainian war in 1 day. You told us that you were going to slap these tariffs this high on China. And so they created this new term that left, taco. Trump always chickens out. And they have little tacos on all, although the Mexican people got very angry about that, Mexican American people. But so then he said, well, I gave him a 60-day deadline on the 61st day. Guess what? And they said, yes, but Israel did that. You're still a taco. So then he cooked up this idea, which is pretty bright, to solve all the problems with this 14-day deadline. So he's saying, number one, I will have a deadline and I will enforce it, and you'll drop the word taco forever. Just wait and see. And then number two is, he told the military, how many days do you need to get the final thing and mobilize? So we're going to do this, probably 48 hours, the Guam deception and all that. And then he thought, well, who knows? Bibi said the other day he could probably do it himself. I don't know what they're doing. They wouldn't tell us, but maybe they have commandos, or maybe they have a smaller bunker. Maybe they might surprise us in the next 72 hours. So he gave a little window for that. And then he said to the Europeans, you got what you wanted. I told everybody I was going to give them some time to negotiate. So they have time now to give up their nuclear facilities. They can do it in a day or two, but they've got to do it in this window. So it worked out really well for him. The Europeans are crowing that, well, he tried to negotiate, and the Democrats are saying, oh my God, we can't use taco anymore. And the military is happy that they just didn't, on day 13, somebody said, you've got to strike tomorrow. And they said, oh my God, they know we're coming, day 14. So, and then, it helps Israel that way too. And they wanted to negotiate. So,
But what about the Tuckers of the world? what about the Tuckers of the world? Meaning this, like, I get maybe it's obviously not a majority or even, but it is a sort of wing of his base that says, I think pretty much we shouldn't do anything. So it was weird also that in the Ted Cruz episode with Tucker, he seemed to not know that the Iranians tried to kill Trump. And
Yes,
then he
that was
said
revealing, though. What happened? What happened when Cruz apprised him that not only
he wants to
was there
drop a nuke
somebody?
on the Iranians, which was, I didn't like, it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I guess I get, maybe he was being honest. And then
I
his
think he
whole,
was being honest, and the person, the Afghan who was hired by the Iranians, was not indicted by Pam Bondi. He was indicted by Merrick Garland and the Bidens in November of 2024. And then he fled to Iran, and they have a pretty good case against him that the Iranian government hired him. So when Cruz tried to explain to Tucker that, Tucker said, "Well, if that's true, I would nuke them." And whether he meant that or not, it did show that the MAGA, there are people in the extreme MAGA that are still Jacksonians, that they feel that we don't nation build, but you have to have some kind of deterrence if they screw around with us. But the other thing is, Marjorie Taylor Greene, to take another example, she was getting a lot of heat, and she announced something that was quite true. She said, "I agree with him on 85% of everything else, so I can live with it." And there's nowhere for those people to go because the left is not, there is no centrist Democratic Party. There's no Ross Perot third party, a populist nationalist. There's just a lunatic Democrat hard left that we haven't, never the likes have we seen since the 1930s. They're crazy. And so Tucker called up Donald Trump and apologized. Donald Trump said he was kooky. And then Donald Trump, they asked him, they said, "Well, did you talk?" "Yeah, he apologized. He's a nice guy. I don't take." So the same thing with Steve Bannon. He, you know, there is nowhere to go for the MAGA base other than that. And if you look exactly what Donald Trump did and what he said, there is no way in the world you could say that he was an isolationist. He, in the first term, he killed Soleimani. He bombed ISIS out of existence. He killed Baghdadi. They called him up and said, "There's 300 of the Wagner group. They're attacking us in Syria. What do we do?" He said, "Kill them all." They killed more Russians in one day than they did in the whole Cold War. He came into power and they said, "Zelensky has frozen all aid to Ukraine in 2000." Yeah, and Biden had, and he said, "Open it up." Same thing in 2017. Then they said, "Well, Russia has gone." They went into Ossetia, they went into Georgia, they went into Donbass and Crimea. And when he came in the first time, he called up Vladimir and he said, "Do not leave your borders." And he said, I don't know if he said it, but he bragged about, I can hit the spires of the Kremlin anytime I want. Vladimir knew that. He got out of that asymmetrical missile deal. He sanctioned the Russians. He went over to NATO and he told the Germans, "Why in the world would you have Nord Stream 2? You're only paying 1.4%. Maybe I won't help you unless you pay 2." They spent an extra $400 billion already. Now he's gone back over and said it's 5%. That's almost another $500 billion. And then when you put Finland with the best artillery in Europe and Sweden, that's really a formidable error for its size. The NATO alliance is in much better shape than it was 8 years ago. So he's a Jacksonian. He doesn't want, he's a builder. So in his way of thinking, building and creating stuff is good business. Everybody makes money. We'll have a corridor. We'll make Gaza into Riviera. Blowing stuff up is bad business. Everybody loses. There's no money. That being said, he's also a humanitarian. He said about, the first thing he says about Ukraine is, all these people are being killed for what? He always says that. He says that about everything. I didn't want to kill all these Iranians for what? And so he's a very hard person to predict, but he does, one thing that has been constant is that he feels that as far as the United States go, he is going to advance its reputation. It's going to be preeminent in the world, financially, culturally, socially, military, at all costs, and that's all he cares about. And he likes people who agree with him and are on the same page. And he feels that Israel is a great deal. I mean, he believes in the Jewish state. He believes all of that, but mostly, if Israel was like Ukraine right now and was in an existential fight and losing or would need, 150 billion a year. But in his way of thinking, Israel is like the United States, and it takes care of business. It doesn't try to look for trouble. We have parallel strategic views. Sometimes we deviate, but this is the type of ally that enhances the United States. Pretty much what he
Victor,
said.
last time we spoke, it was, I think, right after or right before the election. And after President Trump won and the Democrats were humiliated, I think, just the amount of money they spent, and they came out with all these debts after the $1 billion that they got. So they spent more than they even had, and they were paying money to build podcast sets all over the place, and the Oprah set and the Call Your Daddy podcast set, and Trump was going all over the place to Joe Rogan and to this guy and to this comedian set, and he was able to, we spoke about at the time, get a lot of the minority men and Hispanic men, African American men, and all this thing. And after they lost, there was a sort of period where, I think, tell me if I'm correctly, they said we need to think of where we went wrong. They did it also in 2016, where they said the media did it. We didn't speak with the real Americans. So they did it this time. And I think there was two ways to go about it. They could have become more moderate, or they could have become more crazy. And I think they're betting on becoming more crazy. I mean, I look at what's happening in New York with this Mandani guy, and what's happening in, I think, where you are in California with all these protests and the governor supporting them and being against bringing in the National Guard. Why is America's, I guess, one of America's two major parties becoming crazy?
This episode is brought to you by Ayn Rand Center Israel. We meet every alternate Friday to study and discuss the philosophy of Ayn Rand, author of The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. The topics range from ethics to politics, reason versus faith, aesthetics, psychology, and much, much more. This is the only place in Israel where Ayn Rand's unique philosophy is accessible to you, and you're welcome to come learn all about it. It's a great opportunity to learn and meet really interesting people. Attendance is free, and first-timers get a free book. We meet every alternate Friday at the WeWork in Sorona Market, and we like to keep the intellectual discussion going afterwards with some great food and drinks. Click the link for more info on Ayn Rand Center Israel.
Well, it is crazy, and after the election, there were a few people who said, this happened to us before with George McGovern in 1972. We got a landslide loss to Nixon. And then in 76, we went back to the old formula of nominating a liberal with a Southern accent. Every time we had LBJ, and then after that they had Bill Clinton, and every time they had a Northern liberal except for Obama, that was easily they lost. And so they went back, and then Carter turned out to be like McGovern. So then they were 12 years in the wilderness, and then they said, you know what, we're going to get two guys with a Southern accent, Gore and Clinton, and we're going to talk about 100,000 uniforms, midnight basketball, close the border, legal, and they won. And they barely won, and they only won because of Ross Perot, was a right-wing populist that took votes from George H.W. Bush. And even Bob Dole in 1996 got... He was hurt because Ross Perot got 10%, not 19, but he still got 10%. Had all that gone to Dole, he would have won. Clinton never got 51% of the vote in either election, but he was wise enough to see where they were going. And you would think right now, given that model, they would say John Fetterman, Josh Shapiro, these are the kind of people we're going to listen to. But the problem is they are terrified of the left, because they're not just left, they're Jacobins. And by that, I mean they have the ability in Los Angeles to bring out thousands of people who will say crazy things. They'll wave Mexican flags. They'll burn American flags. They'll go after people. They don't know what Jasmine Crockett will do, but she will say the most racist things about old white men, and she'll attack them. They don't know what AOC will do. They do not know what the squad will do. They have crazy Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So the moderates, if there are any, are afraid of those people because they aren't really Democrat. They're not really politicians. They're just internet activists, influencers, left-wing zealots. And they're not interested in governing. They're just interested in destroying things. They're nihilists. So that's who they are now. And they're kind of terrified. So the answer is they have to be beaten 2 or 3 times before they're going to So Gavin Newsom out here in California, they told him, after the election, Gavin, you're responsible as city council member for 8 years, for mayor for 8 years, for lieutenant governor for 8 years, and for governor for 6, 7 years. You're the poster boy for the destruction of California. The water crap, the high taxes, the broke government, the deficits, the illegal aliens, the fires. So you got to pivot. So for about a month, he had Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk. He said he was moderate. And then people shook him up and they said, no, that's the wrong strategy. You'll never get nominated because these people are crazy. You've got to be in a primary. So you've got to be crazier than Karen Bass, and you've got to get crazier than all of them. So now he's saying, we'll withhold taxes to the federal government if they don't treat us right. We're going to get back the guard. We're going, and all these things. And he's now back to his hard left, and he's polling 6% for 2028. So I don't think they're going to have to be beaten again and again. And if the Republican Party can stay calm and not get too arrogant, it's got a great message because it's now the party of the lower, middle, and upper middle class. And that's where the votes are. And it's doing something quite radical. It's substituting racial tribalism for class solidarity. So it's telling a Mexican-American truck driver in Fresno or a black carpenter in Iowa, you have more in common with a white guy who's a plumber than you do with Joy Reid or Alex Padilla. They are the same thing. Just as white guys now have nothing in common with Nancy Pelosi or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, you guys have nothing in common with your versions, but you do have common with the middle class. And it's been very disruptive because a lot of people when Trump walked into Madison Square Garden, it looked like a menagerie. He had Joe Rogan, he had RFK, he had Tulsi Gabbard, he had Hulk Hogan, he had Dana White, he had this weird everybody. They all represented certain weird constituencies, and his granddaughter there was with a halter top talking to. I mean, it was just you'd never seen that in American politics, and you never see so he's created a fanatical following, and all during this hysteria, you thought, well, surely the Hispanics are going to, because he's a nativist, he's a racist. And then CBS comes out with a poll right during the riots a week ago, 56% support Trump on deportation. And then last week, Rasmussen came out and they had the best record of poll accuracy in 2024, a week-long poll. 53% of African Americans, 54% of Hispanics support Trump. So when he does things like no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, we're going to keep people in your community. We're not going to let a bunch of foreigners come in and flood your schools or your dialysis clinics. We're not going to let your kids be threatened by gangs. Look at those people at Martha's Vineyard. That's the people who let them in your community. That message is really, they never caught on. They made fun of him, but he was at McDonald's. He was in a garbage truck. And they didn't get what he was doing. He was trying to resonate the idea that he was not just a billionaire, but his natural affinities and likes were with people other than the Democratic elites. And the Democratic Party has become a party of, it's a medieval, it has no middle class. It's got all these wealthy professionals and billionaires, and then it's got the subsidized poor. There's nobody in between.
Yeah. Victor, can you just comment about New York, because that's where I grew up in, and and it's like I grew up in an ultra orthodox Hasidic community. I might not look about like it now, but all my friends, we grew up in Crown Heights. I grew up right around the Crown Heights riots, so I know Al Sharpton from his original days. But I mean, just to think that 2001 9/11, which is 23 years ago, the Al Qaeda Islamists brought down the buildings, and now you have a guy that's the front runner, because if you're a Democrat at this point, you're the front runner automatically to be the mayor of New York, who has praised the globalized the Intifada and said that Israel shouldn't be a Jewish state, and said all these, I don't know if anti-Semitic things, but definitely borderline and definitely anti-Israel things. And so it's a city where you have the largest, I think, Jewish community in the U.S. But on the other hand, I guess you have a lot of rich, white, educated liberals who, I saw now there was a map that showed that Mandani won in all the white areas and Cuomo won in all the Hispanic and black neighborhoods. So, so what's going to happen in New York, you think? He's going
It's
to win,
kind
right?
of what, like California. I mean, we elected Ronald Reagan for 8 years, and then we had George McMason as governor for 8 years, and Pete Wilson for 8 years, and Schwarzenegger, and we never had anybody since. So why is that? Well, demographically, a lot of middle class people left, and they went to Tennessee and Florida. And I think Ron DeSantis said, if you thought Palm Beach real estate was high now, wait till next year. And there's already an influx. Every time I've spoken in Naples, Florida, or Palm Beach, every single person has a New York accent. And not just the Wall Street class. I'm talking about middle lawyers or doctors. So I think a lot of them, and these were the people who turn out to vote. I think the New York that you're talking to is that you're acquainted with 20 years ago was 2 or 3 million people short now. They've gone. They're in Florida or Texas, but mostly Florida. And then the second thing is, if you look at the Jewish community, we are now, in some cases, 4 generations from the 1880s, 1890s, 1920s diaspora. And we are 80 years from the Holocaust. So you've got a lot of third generation from World War II even. But when I meet a lot of Jewish Americans that are young in the universities, I don't really think they're Jewish in the sense that they're not observant. They feel that it's fashion. They won't be accepted, or they don't have any affinity with Israel, but they see it as a liability. So they go on the other side to virtue signal their opposition to Israel. And they're kind of like the Asian community. They used to be very conservative, but third generation Japanese Americans or Korean Americans, they get indoctrinated in the university, and then they feel that they have to show everybody that their grandparents who got on the buildings in LA during the Rodney King riots and shot, that's not who they are. They would never like that. So I've seen a lot of very conservative communities or people you would think that would not want somebody like this lunatic but they're not there anymore. And those, when you say that there's 1 million Jews or 2 million Jews, I think the Jews that would have voted against him are gone, and the Jews that are not Jews voted for him, or some of them. And then,
And I would just say, Victor, that maybe it's a silver lining. It's a little bit sad, but demographically, the Jews who the progressive liberal Jews do not have children, and if they do, they're intermarried with other religions.
that's
So
been a very popular topic here among conservatives, because when you look at Minnesota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan, and especially, except for Connecticut, which has kind of a resort residence, and California, two things are going. There's been about 4 million defects a year, and they're going to lose by, I think it's by, in the next 12 years, the next 6, they're going to lose about 30 seats in the House, these states, based on the 750,000 reapportionment per district. And then people are looking at the fertility. So when you look at the fertility and people self-identify as Republican or Christian or observant of any religion, they're up to about, our fertility has gone from 2000 even at 2.1 down to 1.65. But when you actually look at what's responsible for that, and you do it by income and location, the people in the red state areas are about 2.5 to 3, and the people in these urban groups are 1 or less. So you're right. It's what AOC said. She wasn't going to have children because the planet was warming up. And I look at my family, to tell you the truth, and I have 2 first cousins that we raised as our siblings, and I have 2 other siblings, and I can tell you that five of us should have had 10 to 12 children, maybe 15 if we had 3. But to the degree that the people who said they were liberal, their kids, they didn't have as many kids, and their kids in their 30s are not married and have kids, and to the people who said they were conservative, have either had 2 or 3 kids, and the 3rd generation. And
which is why,
stark.
by the way,
I have about 10 nieces and nephews who have never married or had children. They're just single professional people in urban environments. And then I have 4 or 5 that have 3, and are married, and married early. So that everybody is talking about that on the right in terms of, I don't know what the word is, glee, but can you encourage these people to do it more and more and more? And that's what got J.D. Vance in trouble when he called them cat ladies.
Yes. But I think in a way, can I just ask you one last question, because it's an interesting, I just want to get your, what you think. Israel, even secular Israelis have a lot of children compared to the West. So even secular Israelis have more children than the replacement rate. So even, let's say you take out all the Orthodox Jews in Israel, and you take out all of the what's called the traditional Jews, the secular Jews, leave them in, Israel would still be growing in population numbers. And also another thing which I guess adds on to my question is that when you look at like woke topics, transgenderism, all these other things, they're almost non-existent here. And then as they're growing in the US and in Europe, and peak woke, some people say we already passed it, whatever, but it was never here. And so I asked a few people why they thought that is. Everyone has a different answer. Why do you think, just obviously you're not an expert in Israeli society, but just offhand, if you had to guess?
I think whether it's explicit or just assumed, even people on the left realize that you're an atoll in an ocean of 500 million Arab Muslims. And they say to you every day, we're going to destroy you, or they say we're going to outbreed you, or I've heard that so much from the Palestinians, or women are going to bear children and destroy you. And we heard that for years, and it never turned out to be true. So I think a lot of Israelis, the majority of them, think there's no margin of error. So if we were going to emulate the West, and they look at the West and they say that Europe is done for, it's shrinking, and the United States is teetering on the brink. If you were to apply those paradigms to us, we would be all through. We couldn't make it. And more importantly, and we know this from psychologists, sociologists, to the degree we can believe them, they have shown again and again that people that have children have a different idea of transcendence. In other words, they worry about the future in a much greater sense. They have less disposable income for themselves because of $250,000 per child to raise them. They don't have as much free time, and they concentrate on the essentials: food, shelter, education, transportation, child raising. And we have to create a safe future for these children, and that means that they're much more responsible, and they're connected with reality. They don't. I mean, it would be very hard for an Israeli young woman to move to an apartment by herself and then have a Western American or European lifestyle and just date for 20 years. And then maybe at 45 years old, find some guy who'd been married 3 times and have 1 child, and then brag about her letters after her name or her job title in a big city. I mean, that can happen in Israel, but I think Israelis understood that that was the norm, which it is on the American left. That's a pact with suicide. It is in your locale, especially when you have people who say that you're. I mean, they say we're decadent, and they say Europe's decadent, but as Westerners, they say you're decadent, and you guys are decadent. You know, da 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 da. And we will destroy you because you're not. And so you're always aware of that in Israel, that these people all around you, no matter what they say, they're envious, they're angry. The more you're successful, the more they feel inferior. The more they get angry at you, the more they try to come up with some conspiracy to explain your success, the more they want you to fail. And I think that permeates all of Israel. It's like a garrison state. It's kind of like Jews when they came here in the first generation. And, in the 1890s to 1920s, they came from god-awful places that had pogroms in Russia or the Baltic states or Eastern Europe. And they got here and they thought, oh, my God, maybe we don't know what's going on. They may want to kill us. They may not. We better have 3 or 4 children. We better be disciplined. And it was that. And that's true, in general, most people. But with Israel, all of those feelings are intensified because you're on the brink. One naive president who would say, I'm a Westerner and I'm going to be like Trudeau or Macron, or I'm going to be, like Barack Obama. That's my model. They're cool. Everybody likes them. That person could ruin Israel in 4 years. He could cut the defense budget. He could try to have all sorts of utopian peace deals with all these terrorist groups. He could go to Iran. I'm the first Israeli to go to Iran. He could do all of those things. He could tell everybody, as we hear now, you should all have 1 child and adopt 1 child because of global warming. It's our biggest. If they do that here, they just hurt the party. There, where you are, they would destroy the country.
Yes. Victor, when are you coming to Israel?
Well, I was there 2 summers ago, and I have been gone. My wife. It's funny you asked it. We were just talking about it because I just got out of surgery 8 days ago, and I had bone masses removed from my sinuses, which is kind of painful. But we hadn't been because I had a tour company that I took 150 people around Europe, and I was in Israel with them 2 years ago. But and then I did, for Hillsdale, I was doing their cruises. So we just sat down and we said, we have a nice place in the mountains, and we haven't been home in 23 years in the summer. So we decided this year to stay. But I'm sure that sometime in the next couple of years, I'll come over.
So when you come, we would love to meet you and hang out.
I love Israel. Somebody, when I was in Haifa, I was talking to Ido Netanyahu.
Yes, Bibi's brother.
The radiologist and poet and writer. And I just said to him, as I was walking in Haifa with him, I said, this reminds me of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo that was filmed in San Francisco in 1954. The streets were clean. Everybody was well-dressed. It was beautiful. And I said, it's not that way. So really, Haifa became San Francisco what it was intended to be. And San Francisco regressed into a dystopia. But I love Israel. I like to go. And it's one of those countries in the United States. There's about 4 or 5 of them that are very tiny. in terms of population, and they're in the worst neighborhoods in the world. Armenia's one, the Kurds are one, Greece is one. I lived in Greece 3 years. And when you go to those countries and you see what the Turks have done to them in the past, or the Arab world has done with the past, there's a sense of unity, and there's a sense of awareness and readiness of the people. And they're serious people, is what I'm trying to say. When I went to Iraq twice and talked to a lot of Kurds, and we have one of the biggest Armenian diasporas here in Fresno County. And when you talk to expatriates, and when I was in Greece, they don't say nonsensical things that, because they understand the Turks, what they'd like to do to them and could do to them any minute. When Greece supported Israel after, I don't know if you knew that, but after Gaza, and they become very close now with us. We have a semi-base there. Mr. Erdogan said that you people in Greece are going to wake up one morning and you're going to see a flight of our rockets coming down on you in Athens. And then when you guys went into Gaza, he said, because of Gaza, you're going to wake up and we're going to take all of the islands of the Dodecan. So it's, when you're on all those places, there's a climate of, I don't know what it is. It's repressed tension, or it just, everybody is, no matter what their politics are, they all have one thing in common, that we carved out a civilization in the middle of madness. You know what I mean? And it's mad. It's crazy. And they hate us because we're successful, and they would like to destroy us. They don't want to emulate us. And that's Turkey, Greece. That's the Islamic countries around the Kurds, who is Islamic, and that makes them. There's a kind of a, I don't want to say an attraction, but there is an admiration for people like that, and that keeps them going.
And also, a mutual enemy always helps society come around. So every time, like you remember, before the war, for October 7th, we were at each other's throats here with the judicial reform and these. I live right next to the attorney general, the former attorney general. So there was protests outside of his house here. We couldn't drive because our streets were blocked all the time here. And then once the war started, the protest stopped.
And I even think that they might have picked not that iconic date, not just because it was an anniversary of Yom Kippur, but they felt that the general dissension in Israel made it a force multiplier.
Exactly. No, we know that that's one of the things intelligence has found, that they were talking about Israeli society being weakened, and this was the opportunity. So that is one of the things in Sinwar's notes and stuff that they found.
Yeah,
so
they do. I talked to an Israeli here in the United States, and she said to me, well, I don't understand why they attacked, because right before, we were the most liberal area in Israel, right next to Gaza, and we had people come over and we paid them 3 times what they made in Gaza, and then we took them when they were injured to all the clinics. If they hurt themselves, digging in an olive orchard, we paid for that, and then we got to know them on a first day basis, and they knew we were very liberal, and we objected. And I said, everything you entailed, do you think that might have singled you out for the point of attack? And she said, what do you mean? I said, you see that as magnanimity to be reciprocated. They think it's either weakness or arrogance to be taken advantage of. I'm sorry, that's the way it is. And I think that's what happens. That's why you have to be internally, vigilant eternally for all times. You can't have one moment of laxity. We're getting to that point too in the United States, but we're not surrounded like you are yet.
you have the oceans.
Yeah.
Victor
Okay.
Davis Hanson, it was a pleasure talking to you as always.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll do this in a few more months if you agree to it. And when you come, love to meet you. And thank you so much for being with us.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me, Ariel.